everyone, and a warm welcome to this Zoom event organized by the MEDCA Association. And thanks to all the participants, all MEDCA members, and also all our supporters who are here with us today. We appreciate you very much. So MEDCA is an association of Slovenian nurses and other health workers in the field of medical cannabis treatment. And our main purpose is to encourage the improvement of the knowledge of nurses and other employees in the health sector about treatment with cannabis and its active ingredients, as well as advocacy and counseling for individuals who are being treated with medical cannabis products or are self-medicating with it. So in order to achieve our goal and carry out the purpose, we first, I think, need to listen to foreign experts and their experiences, which are a little richer than ours at this point. So that's why today we invited our dear friend, she's also a nurse from the United States, Ashley Wynn-Grimes, who is a founder of Cannabis Nursing School, and she's also author of 2 books. And today, Ashley will talk about medical cannabis in the United States and share with us also her experience as a cannabis nurse expert. So that's it. So please, Ashley, you can start. And also, thank you again. We are very honored to have you with us today. We can learn so much from you and your experience. Thank you. You are amazing. So please start.
Thank you. I appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you all. So if at any point I am talking really fast, or if there's any jargon that I use that you're unfamiliar with, just kind of stop me and let me know if I need to rephrase or slow down. I
will ask also everybody to mute, please.
So I put together a presentation that goes through some of our history in the United States, and then I'm gonna sprinkle in some of my own personal experiences with being a cannabis nurse here. I think that we have evolved a lot in this space, but there is also a lot of room for us to grow as far as the role of our healthcare professionals here in the US. And so part of my mission is to help shift those healthcare perspectives to be inclusive of holistic modalities, as opposed to being more of a treatment-based model, which is where we are now. So cannabis fits into the larger scheme of how we approach health and wellness. I think personal opinion, I think that other countries are more acceptant to various modalities outside of the traditional healthcare model, meaning surgery, tubes, IVs, things like that. So yoga, mindfulness, meditation, things along those lines, I feel like are a little bit more accepted outside of the US. Here we are high stress, move very quickly, want to get to the end result. And so in a lot of ways that serves, but then in others, there's opportunity. So again, my name is Ashley. I am the founder of the Cannabis Nursing School. It will be launching this year. And I've done a ton of other things over the course of the past 5 years. I have been actively in this space since 2018. Where I really started to discover the endocannabinoid system and learning that there was more to what nursing is, because I had been a nurse for over 12 years at the time, 10, 11 years at the time. And I worked in various areas of healthcare. So, and I'm not sure if you guys use the same language, but medical, surgical, surgery, ICU, I've been in all those places where essentially the job of the nurse is to hand out medicine, to fulfill treatment planning in our hospital units, and essentially just get the task done. At some point, I got my master's degree in nursing education because I wanted more from my career. I was very goal oriented, and I was able to climb the corporate ladder, and I ended up working for a 14 hospital system where essentially the corporate office was to oversee the project management of the 14 hospitals and make sure that they were hitting their targets, money targets. It was always very financially driven. And for that reason, I wasn't really motivated in the way that I probably should have been, because my intention, the thing that's intrinsic to me, that's important for me, is being able to help the patient, help people, and to serve. So I actually was a victim of cyber theft. $15,000 was stolen out of my account. I had saved that money through all of my years of nursing to buy a house for me and my family, and somebody just stole it. And for me, you know, during that time, it was devastating, very much trauma inducing. But when I look at it now and I look back at it, I realized that was the thing that kind of pivoted the way that I approached my life and wanting to take control of my life. And so while somebody was able to actively, you know, be $15,000 richer without having to do anything to obtain it, I realized from that experience that I too, not that I want to steal from people, but I too can also take more control over my life and how I approach it and the things that I do to achieve it. And so for many reasons in my nursing career, I felt like life was being done to me. At some point, I decided I was going to start to do life for me. And that's when I started to transition into the entrepreneur that you see today. That transition also included a lot of health and self awareness modalities. So I did begin to explore yoga. I did begin to recognize that there was more to my own personal self-care that I had been acknowledging prior to that. And that's when I actually discovered the endocannabinoid system, and I was appalled that nobody else knew about it, or at least it didn't seem like they knew about it. So that's when it became my mission to be able to teach other people about the endocannabinoid system. And so it started off straight side hustle. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with side hustle culture. You do your job, and then on the side, you offer somebody something for a few dollars, and hope for the best, pretty much. And so my idea behind it was I didn't want to put all of my commitment into this. I still was very much had stigma against the plant. And when I would, offer these trainings, what I realized is that the nurses that I was training weren't doing anything with the information. And so that took me down another rabbit hole of trying to identify where the barrier or where the block was, why nobody was doing the thing that I imagined that they would do, right? Take the information and create impact, to share it with more people, right? Like, it doesn't matter if one person has information or knows something to be true if it stays within that one person, right? My opinion, it is our duty to share information that has been gifted to you and offered to you, and we should do that in gratitude. And so with that being said, this rabbit hole that I'm still living in continues to grow, and I continue to want to push the messaging and to empower other nurses and healthcare providers and help shift that healthcare perspective. So one of the things that I've done is I've written ACEs Medicine, which was actually inspired by some work that I've done on a guidelines committee. In Maryland, which is one of the states in the US, we have a bill that has passed that allows children access to medicine or cannabis in their school setting. So prior to that bill, children who were medical cannabis patients, even though the state said it was okay for them to be a medical cannabis patient, they were not allowed to be administered their medicine during a school day. And so the parents would have to come to the school, pick the child up, take them out of class, take them off campus, because we have what's called drug-free zones on our school. So in a specific perimeter around the school, you cannot have drugs on the campus. So the parent would have to take the child off the campus, give them their tincture drop, which is the primary mode of administration for children generally, and then take the child back. And so now we're talking about a child not only disrupting their day, but also identifying themselves as different, even more different than they already are, because they're suffering from chronic illness. So with that being said, I also identify as an advocate. We have other bills coming that I'm passionate about. One of them in Maryland specifically is giving children access to, patients access to cannabis in the hospital setting. So all of those things are happening in real time, but they're happening like a patchwork quilt kind of thing. So in one state, it might be this, in another state, it might be that. There are different versions of our medical programs and et cetera, et cetera. I also coach other nurses. So I originally started off with a training course where I was saying, what is a cannabinoid? What is a terpene? What is it this? What is it that? And teaching people how to implement cannabis into their care. Like I said, for me, I need action behind the information. So helping other nurses, coaching them to do something with this information to overcome barriers and all those kind of things. And additionally, I'm here speaking with you all today. So really being able to get my voice out there. That's a personal development thing on my behalf. Learning how to use my voice has been a definite challenge, but also being able to access and reach more people to let them know that cannabis is medicine. And even if they walk away understanding that a cannabinoid like THC and CBD are the molecules that help support the endocannabinoid system, and that there are things called terpenes that also necessitate or facilitate the health and wellness through this plant. I'm happy if you even know just that sentence alone. Any questions before I start kind of moving into the content?
But you explained it perfectly.
Okay, good. So 5 historical facts about the cannabis in the US. We have a long history. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things that has kind of shaped the way that we view cannabis here. So back in the 1600s is like, cannabis has always been here, but because of our relationship with other countries. So we had the colonies, we had Christopher Columbus come, it settled onto the US. There's a little bit of controversy as to whether or not how indigenous people leverage cannabis in the US, but it is documented that on Christopher Columbus' ship via the Mayflower, he actually brought a lot of cannabis here to the US, and it was actually used for industrial purposes. Hemp was used for industrial purposes to make clothes, rope, just other various tactile objects. So, it was okay. Nobody made a big fuss about it. Nobody was like, oh my gosh, did you bring the cannabis? Like it wasn't nothing to be spoken about when it was brought to the US. So it was a very benign, industrial, useful product that there was no like connotation to negativity or really even positivity. It was a product that could be used, that could be leveraged, that could be resourced, right? Like any other plant, like tea and all those kind of things. But in the 1900s, that's when we started to see the Marijuana Tax Act. Essentially saying that they were going to make it illegal to possess and transfer cannabis here. So that's when we start to see the restrictions come. Part of it is necessitated in racism. U.S. has a long history of racism based in slavery times. And so around that time, we also had what's called the Mexican Revolution, where we also got an influx of people from Mexico illegally immigrating to the United States. And so prior to that Mexican Revolution, the U.S. hadn't really seen smokable cannabis. And so they started to assign smoking cannabis or like the negative connotations with this group of people who came over into the United States. Somebody started to assign negativity to smoking cannabis to the Mexican immigrants. And so you can see documentation of this in various newspaper articles, highly like the Vanity Fair and just all these different type of things. So the term marijuana actually is said to be called marijuana as a way to demonize the plant in reference to our Mexican counterparts. And so that's why we don't choose to use cannabis here. And I would even like to ask the question, is that something that comes up for you in Slovenia as far as the difference between marijuana and cannabis?
Yes, we have very big problems because of the terminology. Maybe somebody will tell more. Ojo. They had some, I think they wanted to change, like in our language, cannabis is konoplja, but they wanted to change to cannabis also.
Okay. And so where did the original terminology come from for you all?
Actually, original comes from the single convention, and that's from 61, and that's the biggest problem. And now they're using also term the medical cannabis, but we rather have cannabis for medicinal purposes, because any cannabis is medical.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And so, go ahead.
No. I will stop now.
Yeah, so the distinction between medical and recreational, I believe is a constructual thing to kind of help, commodify and make money off of it. That's kind of the feeling that I get when we talk about the differences. So even when we talk about early in the 1900s, they're like, yes, we'll use hemp and we'll use this plant to make rope, and that's perfectly fine. But because this group of people here come to the United States and decide to smoke it, and we've never seen it, and we don't like the fact that they're here in the first place because they're illegal immigrants, now we're going to call it something different, and then we're going to put law or policy in place to make it harder to access it the way that they have created this new idea, right? And so you see all of these articles kind of identifying marijuana. They're saying victims of the Mexican drug, right? Like, so they're saying this is Mexico's drug. I don't know if I put this other article here. Oh, so when you look at the article at the top right, where it's saying it's exposing marijuana drug evil in swing bands, right? So when you look at the history here in the US, swingsters, jazz was generally assigned to Black and brown people who went to underground dance locations. And so what they're saying is, without saying it, is that cannabis or reefer is for this group of people, and this thing is evil. So it's almost like there's a like this group of people means that this is evil. And if you give them this plant, or this group of people has this plant, that also means that the plant must be evil. You see what I'm saying? So it's like this connected idea in the mainstream media that is driving the way that we're looking at the plant as a whole. Does that make sense to you all? Okay, I'm assuming yes. So by the 1960s, then it became more part of a counterculture movement thing. So we start seeing like lobbyists, we start seeing moms who are upset about the plant, and you start to see the war on drugs kind of come through, where now we have politicians saying this plant is evil, we don't want it here. And then because of that narrative that has been kind of progressing over time since the early 1900s, now, the mainstream people who are just trying to do right by their children and their families, they're saying they're advocating against the plant because they think it's terribly bad. They think it's going to lead to addiction. They think it's going to lead to, all of these, your brain or, sizzling or whatever. And so What was also interesting, at least in my opinion, is that in the 1950s and 60s, cigarette companies were also advertising to women saying that they could stay slim from smoking cigarettes. And so we all know the fetal impact the impact on children or fetuses from smoking cigarettes. So it's almost as if we're like, let's stay slim. It's okay to stay slim. Let's prioritize that over the health of your child. But then we're going to advocate against a plan that could potentially save somebody's life, right? So, like, in the way that we've evolved in the way that we approach different ideas, it just seems like it's juxtaposed or counterintuitive to the overall health and wellness of society as a whole. And the narrative doesn't necessarily match or doesn't create balance in the minds of our people. So 1996, that's when we got our first legalization bill in California. So for me, when I look at this is like California is far away from me. It's on the other side of the country. So it's a very different lifestyle, it's a very different culture. Sunny California, Hollywood is there, has a very like hippie type vibe when you enter into California, which is so for the rest of the country, it was like, wow, of course California would do something so rebellious or revolutionary. Like that's what it felt like in 1996. Like you go to California, you might be able to get some weed, but we'd never do something like that here on the East Coast. Like we're conservative here. Like that's kind of the difference in the messaging. And so 2012 comes and we're shocked, surprised. Washington State and Colorado actually became the first two states to legalize recreational. They are also, for the most part, our baseline study, where we look to get guidance to help develop any policy around cannabis from state to state. It's almost become an unspoken competition, like who can do their rec cannabis program better. And so that's where that kind of patchwork thing, they're like, I'm going to implement this, I'm going to implement that, maybe I can make it better for this reason, or I can make it better for that reason. And so from state to state, you see these different versions of medical programs and recreational programs that vary from state to state. So now we are in a place where we have 21 states that have legalized recreational use. Again, looks totally different. And I'm going to bring up DC.
Ashley, I'm sorry to interrupt. Mm-hmm. Somebody is asking a question. What is recreational?
Oh, okay.
Quickly explain and then go.
Yes. So a medical program is essentially, the process is you go to a provider, you get a medical card, and then now you have access to a dispensary. You have to pay the medical provider money, you have to pay for your medical card, and then you have to pay for the bud or the medicine at the dispensary. That's the process for our medical programs generally, and that's pretty consistent. Our recreational program says you do not have to get a medical card. You do not have to go to a doctor. You can just show your ID that says that you're 21 years old or older. You can walk into the dispensary. You can purchase your medicine. The idea between the two, you're getting the same bud. You're probably going into the same dispensaries. The difference is, do we have a medical provider involved? And do we have some sort of validation that identifies you as having some sort of justifiable medical condition? Does that explain it well?
I think yes.
Okay. So now we have 21 states here that have recreational programs, and then we have 37 states that have medical programs. So those 37 states that have medical programs, those again vary. So it's 3 tiers of medical program. There's a CBD only program, where essentially you can get CBD with less than 0.03%, which I think is what you all have there. We have a low THC program, where essentially they only have low dose THC. There's no specific cap on it. It is determined by the state who implements it. And then you have full access in your medical program, meaning that you can access any product, whether it's high THC, low THC, or whatever. So no, I won't go there. So yeah, that's it for the most part. So recently, Joe Biden, our president, has implemented a federal bill. So remember, most of the talk that I've been doing has been around each state and the variation in our program. Part of the problem is that our federal government hasn't descheduled cannabis. What does that mean? So right now, cannabis is a Schedule I drug, which means it has no medicinal purpose, and it sits on that. Other things that are on that list include fentanyl, barbiturates, other like very dangerous heroin. The cannabis sits on a list with them. So there has been a lot of conversation about descheduling, meaning can we have less restriction around the cannabis plant, because now these states are doing a lot with it. They have these quote unquote medical programs. And so how is the federal government going to support the state from state to state? And so this past December, Joe Biden, he put out the bill, the Marijuana and Cannabidiol Research Expansion Act. It was passed. The bill is now in law. And so, let's see, maybe it's better. Personal use, smoking joints is not working. Yeah, yes, I agree. But that's the terminology that we use here. I absolutely like that better. But if I were to have a conversation with anybody else in the States, it wouldn't resonate with them. And I agree with you, like any access to medicine is medicine, and it really shouldn't be differentiated, whether it's medical or recreational or even personal, because even when you're consuming your medicine, it's still a personal choice that you make. You see what I'm saying? So from a constructual point of view, the determination of the difference really is based in how can we commodify? How can we make money off of it? So, and I didn't want to go there with this conversation, but with our medical program, when I brought up the 3 points of contact, they all require money. So if you're in a medical program, you have to pay cash out of pocket for your medical card. You have to pay cash out of pocket to see the provider, and you have to pay cash for the medicine itself. So this is what we're calling a medical program. So it almost justifies the need to have to pay various people throughout the process. When you have your quote unquote recreational, they also charge you, but differently. So no, you don't have to get the medical card, and no, you don't have to see the certifier, but they increase taxes on your product. So now you're paying more for the product. So the distinction literally is, do you pay this way or do you pay that way? So I'm going to call this bill, because I don't like that it's so long. I'm going to call this bill the Biden law. That's what I've been calling it. But it passed in December. And so this was actually the first piece of standalone federal cannabis legislation in U.S. history. So when we went through the history, it was a progressively constricting evolution. So we bring it here. We're we don't really acknowledge it. It's not a big deal. We don't have any ideas towards it. It's just a resource. And over time, we start to say, oh, no, like those Mexicans, I don't really like it. Oh, no, they smoking it. Like it's all of this kind of fear-based approach to it. And the fear increases over time. With this bill, now we're saying, okay, like, let's stop approaching this plant with as much fear. Let's create some rules around it so we can understand it better. And so this is the first time that has been done in U.S. history. And so what does it include? So researchers So one of the issues about this Schedule I status is that researchers really don't have that much access to cannabis. And so we don't have any strong evidence, or we have some strong evidence. We don't have a ton of strong evidence to support it. And it's because the federal government wasn't in support of researchers really digging into the plant. A lot of the research prior to this time frame has been in an attempt to identify the harm. So I don't know how familiar you are with research standards, but like if you come into a research and you have a specific hypothesis about something, you're trying to prove the hypothesis as opposed to not prove or get something different. And so if you approach the plant with this fear-based idea, like cannabis will hurt your lungs, and you do this study to identify all the ways that cannabis hurts your lungs, you're going to do everything in your power. I mean, you know, the best you can to prove your hypothesis right. And that's essentially what bias is. And so now they can actually request the cannabis to do the research legally, and the FDA or our Food and Drug Administration will encourage them to do it. Whereas previously it was like done under the radar, or they didn't have a lot of funding or support or all these things that kind of interfered with whether or not they could even do a fair amount of research. Another issue that happens with our research studies is that we have small ends, we have small population sizes, sample sizes, right? And so now that you can get more cannabis to research on, now you can have a bigger sample size to get a more accurate study, or a more accurate is not right, more pinpointed study, more consistent study. So manufacturers now also will be able to import cannabis to facilitate research. So another issue that comes up is being able to transfer cannabis from state to state, because federal government says, no, it's still illegal. So you can't move this cannabis from Maryland to Virginia. You can't move this cannabis from Maryland to DC. You can't take your cannabis from California and bring it all the way home to Maryland. That's not something that's legal. If you take it through the airport, or if you're caught, quote unquote, trafficking from state to state, the Drug Enforcement Agency will have the ability to stop you. And so now this law says they don't have to stop you. If you're a researcher, they can now, you know, get different plants from different states. And that could be part of the research study, because the thing is, California cannabis is different from Maryland cannabis, because California has a ton of sunshine. Maryland doesn't have a ton of sunshine. So a lot of our plant is grown inside. So being able to study purple kush in California and purple kush in Maryland, that could be the study. Checking out different profiles, seeing the impact on patients, seeing how sunlight interferes, seeing how moisture differences makes a difference in the bud that you are able to produce among a specific population of people, right? And so now that we don't have DEA interference, now our researchers can now kind of be a little bit more creative about how they approach research. And then our HHS is the Department of Human and Health Services. So basically, they can also provide recommendations for supporting the state's research. So again, another federal government entity who would just kind of sit on the sideline. They didn't want anything to do with it. They probably got in the way. Now they're saying, okay, now we're going to help support you. We're going to help create policies so we can look at the health benefits in patients and in our patients. And so all of these things, oh, there's one more. And also they don't need to review with the DEA. So the Drug Enforcement Administration, again, are the people who would interfere, would stop you. You could go to jail behind it. And so you have to, before you would have to let the DEA know if you were going to make any changes to any research. So every time your hypothesis shifted, anytime that you wanted to include additional variables to the study, you had to get an approval from the DEA, and you had to, I mean, now you don't have to do that. It's not another barrier. So now, again, that more specific result, you're able to get that because I'm sure people were lying about whether or not stuff changed, because I think a hypothesis changes all the time. But now they can be more transparent about what that study is and what that study is doing to their patients. And if any changes or shifts need to be happen, you'll be more likely to get more accurate results. Okay, yes, I am done. So overall, that bill is, I believe, is a big deal. We have not seen the implications behind the bill in real time yet, but the fact that this is a novel piece of cannabis legislation that has come through, and the fact that we have all of these state consensus that cannabis is something that needs to be done, I think means we're moving in the right direction. The issue that I will bring up, and I'll talk a little bit more about as far as the legislation piece is concerned, is that there are a lot of pillars to support the legislation that have not been fundamentally created. So even as we're building and we're getting some of this more acceptable legislation that supports cannabis in our society and in our culture, there's still a lot of work to do. And so I'm going to pause. I see a hand up. So Alexandra, you can ask your question.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Ashley.
Hey.
I'm really grateful for being here and listening to you all. Right now, at the moment, I do have one question in regards to manufacturing cannabis for researching purposes. So is there any, in terms of quality and checking what's exactly the quality of the cannabis that is used, do you have some institutions that are doing that job before cannabis hits the laboratory? How do you manage that?
So there are, we call them third-party vendors. So what does that mean? Essentially, let's say today I woke up and I wanted to open a lab that tested cannabis, I could do that. There is no very strict requirements around how they test the lab, the quality of the testing, and then each state has different rules around testing. So Maryland, for example, has 2 points of testing, one at grow, one at the dispensary. Washington, D.C., which is pretty much our sister, like I can drive there 45 minutes, they only have 1 point of testing, and that's at grow. So what happens in between transport, packaging, selling? So there's no real consistency. And in addition to that, our third-party testers, this could test for X, Y, and Z pesticides. This third-party vendor can test for X and Y pesticides.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question, actually. I'm coming from Serbia, and here we don't have yet legalized. I don't believe it's going to be soon. But recently I started reading more into that, and that's one of the questions I was considering, because we first need to manufacture something that's not legal, and how you're gonna do that, and you get the quality product that you can actually prove it works. So that's a tricky question, I know, but yeah, I understand now.
Yeah, I mean, and it is a big deal. So I've spoken with one woman who is the mother of a severe seizure patient. And so in DC, where they only have that 1 point of testing, they only allow, they don't allow children to grow. Like, you can't grow for your children, right? So adult patients do have the right to grow a certain amount of plants. I can't remember exactly how many it is right now, but mom was actually growing, and then they changed it so she couldn't grow for her daughter anymore. And they had a regimen that was working. She was free for X amount of time. And then when they changed it, she had to go get her medicine from the dispensary because now she can't grow it. And there was some sort of derivative of MDMA, which is like ecstasy, like the derivative of ecstasy. And that derivative sparked her seizure, and she ended up in the ICU. And so according to the test, the third-party test, there was none of that derivative in it. But when her daughter ended up in the ICU, they took her blood. They saw she was positive for ecstasy because it was a derivative of it. And so it showed up on the tox screen as such. And so then they wanted to put mom in jail, or I'm sorry, call CPS or Child Protective Services on mom, thinking that she's giving her child MDMA when it was something that was laced in the product that had not been identified on the test. And so mom took that bud, she got it tested at another facility only to find out that it did have the MDMA in it. And when she would look at the test that the dispensary gave her, it was outdated. So those things are important, right? So if you're taking it as medicine and you have underlying chronic conditions, or even if you don't, even if it's laced with pesticide, right? Like if the grower doesn't have integrity and is lacing their products with pesticide, nobody deserves to have to consume that. And it should be transparent that that's true. The other part of this that comes up with this bill that I didn't mention, our Food and Drug Administration, they're the ones who approve all of our food, right? Now, United States does not have really good quality food, to be honest with you. We have a lot of processed food that has chemicals in it that's not necessarily good for you. So their standards are actually quite low as to what's acceptable. So this bill actually is pretty much setting it up so the FDA will be responsible for monitoring and managing our cannabis products. So while I think it's important to create standards around like how we test it, I also think that we need to increase the standards of what's acceptable for human consumption. Does that make sense?
That's 100% true.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for asking the question. So that's the legal stuff. I don't really like playing in that side of things too much. You have to know it and you have to be aware of it. But for me, my thing is the stigma. Coming from the context of being brown in America, having a history of slavery in America, being a woman in America, it comes with its own, being a nurse in America, it comes with its own level of stigma, judgment, to say the least, and just the way that we approach various ideas. So when I entered the cannabis space, the one thing that I heard often, and I'm sure you guys hear it too, is there's a stigma against cannabis. There's a negative connotation against cannabis. That's why the history is important. Why do we have this negative connotation about cannabis? That's fine. But what do we do to approach cannabis from a place of not necessarily being stigmatized behind it, or looking at it from a negative light, or assigning it to specific groups of people who may be associated with it? Because we also do that. There's stoner culture, and then in Black culture, and all these kind of things that essentially associates cannabis with negative ideas or negative ways of thinking, or the war on drugs. Like we've been fighting this war on stuff for over 30 years now. And so how can we overcome or shift the narrative about how we view cannabis as a mainstream objective? Because if you go into a group of people and you say, hey, I want to talk about cannabis, this happens to me all the time, somebody will say something off the wall like, you trying to kill my son? It's like, am I trying to kill your son? Because all I said was a cannabinoid terpene and, it's different forms. That's all I'm talking to you about. But your mind automatically goes to this negative idea. And so one of the big issues in America is the stigma related to different concepts and ideas that have been perpetuated through our media. And another example of that is in our nurses. And so our nurses face a huge amount of stigma in the way that we approach ourselves. It shows up in our confidence. It shows up in the way that we think through and critically think, right? There's a lot of stereotypes about how we're supposed to perform that don't necessarily match with the person who's trying to uphold this idea. We call nurses heroes through the pandemic, where they were burned out and tired and not feeling like a hero and scared. And we kind of have this hierarchy situation going on where we have physicians that kind of sit at the top of the hierarchy. We listen to them. Everything they say is gold. And then anything that we say kind of comes second, and you kind of hope for the best. And so because of that dynamic, that oppressive dynamic that happens, a lot of our nurses are definitely feeling very much stigmatized, and which has been leading to burnout. And I'll talk a little bit about that too. So the combination of the idea of the stigmatized idea of cannabis, which is negative, and then the juxtaposed position of a nurse who's supposed to be a hero, and putting it together creates the ultimate stigma. And so being able to help people to recognize that our nurses are human, they have various experiences that make them human, and that they also may be participating in the consumption of this plant also is part of overcoming the stigma. Because whether you're self-medicating because maybe you're suffering from anxiety due to the work that you do, because maybe your patient died that day, or if you're medicating because you have a long chronic illness of Tourette syndrome, right? So regardless, there's this overhanging idea about not losing your license, because this is your livelihood. You've worked so hard to get this license to practice as a nurse. And now you're pairing it with the idea of cannabis. Now you're hiding who you are. You're hiding. Now you can't be the best version of you, because the part of you that probably is the most relaxed version of you, the most present version of you, has something to do with cannabis. And you can't show that to the world. And so you can't be you, right? This is not how I planned on talking about this page, which is why I have different pictures on here that don't really match it. So I'm just going to touch on it. But my book, Ace's Medicine, actually talks about children and the ultimate stigma against children. And so I had brought up the bill earlier. And so in my mind, the picture on the left, that's the nurse. That's the image from the book. She actually is talking to the child, which is, his name is Asa. And the thing I wanted to point out is up on her wall here. You can't see it clearly, but she is following the nursing process as she is dealing with the little boy in the room. And so being able to approach cannabis as opposed to approaching it with like how you feel or what you think or what your bias is, you know, whether you love it or whether you hate it, it doesn't really matter what you think. But being able to follow the nursing process in your approach with your patients really is, I believe, that the way that we will help overcome that stigma. There's a reason why we're a trusted profession, is because we follow consistently with our processes and the way that we approach people, so people know what to expect from us. So anyway, I was going to talk longer about stigma, but I'm not going to stay here for too long. Let's see. Any questions? I think I heard somebody unmute.
No, I just want to say, I see you, I see myself in you. I feel this stigma so much here in Slovenia, here around the health workers, around the nurses. It's so much stigma. When I made this association, one nurse came to me and said, "So what is this now? You will take nurses and you will smoke with them, or what?"
Yeah, I get that all the time too. Yeah, I get that all the time too. Like, and you know, it's unfortunate because a lot of what we see about cannabis is, and I do love the empowering nature of like consuming freely and in public. I do appreciate that, but when the public sees it, it doesn't give a good message, right? Like, because they already come from a negative point of view. So being able to approach the plant in a way that helps people feel safe with it. And I don't think we should always have to box ourselves, but we also have to kind of spoon feed them slowly. to get used to the idea that this is here, why it's here, how it's beneficial to them or their family. And then we can kind of start to move the idea. So then when they see public consumption, now they're not seeing something negative. They're seeing something like, oh, that is empowering. I get it now, you know? So we do have what's called the American Cannabis Nurses Association, which I believe is similar to what you have created in Sylvania. They did develop what we call a scope of practice for nurses. While it hasn't been necessarily adopted worldwide, those of us who are in the space, we are familiar with it and we know it. And essentially, it's talking about the advocacy around safe access. We want to promote nursing excellence, talking about the process for improvement, talking about evidence-based approach, talking about implementation into care, professionalism, all the things that define our role. They've broken it out in relation to what our role is as a nurse who is practicing in the cannabis space.
So actually you can see this, how is it called? Can you, nurse scope of practice. In my master's degree is a little bit in Slovene.
Is what? Say it again?
The Slovenian language.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, so they can see it there in Slovene.
Okay. All right, cool. So we also have the National Council for State Boards of Nursing, who have developed guidelines. So the National Council for State Boards of Nursing oversee all of our state nursing boards. And so our boards are the people who, each state's boards, they create our test, our NCLEX. I don't know what the abbreviation stands for, but that's the test that helps us get our licensing. And then they also oversee our licensure. And so we pay them to make sure we can maintain our licensure every year. And so the overarching council, they actually created guidelines. Now, I'm not going to read through them all. They're here. You basically have an understanding of the plant and the laws that regulate the plant. And they kind of break down the principles based on your role, whether you're a nurse practitioner or a registered nurse. The thing about this or these guidelines, I think it's helpful. It does help us guide our practice, but I think the intention behind these guidelines, from what I understand from the lawyer who I've heard her speak about it, was really intended to protect our boards of nursing, not necessarily to protect the nurses who are operating in the space. And so I think this was more of a legal measure. A lot of people do not acknowledge the fact that these guidelines exist. And when you bring them up with your boards of nursing, I've heard this in multiple states, they pretty much want to kind of push it under the rug. And maybe they're just waiting for the right time. I'm not 100% sure, but there has really not been much action behind these guidelines here. So I told y'all it is my goal to shift healthcare perspectives. How much time, how am I doing on time? I have a half an hour or so, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to move a little fast because I want you all to ask questions, but it is my goal to shift healthcare perspectives. And one of the ways is through acknowledging burnout. We're having a significant nursing shortage here, exhausted. COVID was a mess. Being able to protect the nurses who were working on the floor was a mess. It was just a mess. It was to the point where we had nurses getting one mask and we had to clean that one mask during the height of the pandemic. And we were told to put them in paper bags and then take it to the OR to get cleaned. And then you would come pick up that same mask the next day. That's how bad it was. And so there are a lot of people who I was working during the pandemic, but shortly after I quit, there are nurses who are severely stressed, fatigued. I mean, just the epitome of what burnout is. So part of my goal is to help nurses find opportunities in the space. because I think it's important to recognize the shifting tide in the way that healthcare is running. And due to the nursing shortage, it's significant. They are paying nurses a ton of money, whether you're a travel nurse, whether you're taking on a full-time position, because that's not trending no more to be in a full-time role. They'll give you $30,000 just for taking a full-time role as a stipend, just so you'll stay in the job for a couple of years. That's how bad it is. And so because of all these factors and the social media influence, nurses are now taking a different approach to how they want their lives to run and how they are approaching their careers. They're realizing now you don't have to be at the bedside. You can make money online. You can now advocate for yourself. You can now ask questions, and all of the practices that, like the mask thing that I went through when I was working during the pandemic, that's not a secret no more. Because at a point before social media was playing a significant role in the way that we saw the world, they could do stuff like that to nurses and we wouldn't say anything because we were in that oppressed hierarchy situation. You see what I'm saying? It would happen and we wouldn't talk about it. I talk a lot about it in the book Stigmatized, like the bullying culture that happens with nurses, that nurses eat their young, all of those things now are not things that kind of lay under the radar. And has a lot to do with the burnout and the fatigue and this social media kind of being fused together. And so, what a nurse is capable of now is I have no idea where it's going to go, and I don't know how it's going to change it, but it is a significant change that's going to occur. So I did want to touch on different ways that we can advocate here. A couple things: definitely educate yourself on the facts, and so you can speak with confidence. A lot of people, because of that stigma, they'll know something about the plant, but they don't really dig into it, and they don't feel comfortable speaking about it. And so being able to approach it, have a conversation. If somebody comes to you and say, "You're trying to kill my son," you don't kind of quiver in the corner because you're like, "Oh man, am I trying to kill your son?" Being able to approach these conversations with confidence, I think will help to shift that narrative. Reach out to elected officials. I think I mentioned it a little while ago, it wasn't here. A legislator, actually, I reached out to a legislator back in 2020, and he reached out to me last week. And it was in reference to the bill that gives children access to cannabis in the hospital. And so let them know what your view is on cannabis, because they actually do read their letters. Participating in rallies, protests, public events. Again, being able to kind of trickle out as much information to as many people as possible. Join job-related organizations and become active. That's the key, being active in different organizations, not just kind of sit on the sidelines, be in it, be in the know, touch on, people, get to know people, things like that, and then connect with other advocates to build a larger, more powerful voice. And so these are things that I do teach some of the nurses to leverage in their own practice, in their own work, because we are suffering from burnout. A lot of us have lost passion for life and purpose and all those kind of things. So reinvigorating with helping to find a way to direct energy in a way that really creates impact is something that can be very useful for a lot of healthcare providers. What do I have here? Yeah, I talked about all that. Okay. Ways to create impact, similar to advocacy. So there's a purpose to me writing a book, right? So as many people as possible can actually see and get access to language and understand the experience of the patients that we're serving. That's important, because I think if you're not the person who was taking your kid off of campus to give them their medicine so that way they can eat that day, you would have no idea that that's somebody's experience. And so being able to give people more insight on those experiences is important. Going to different events. This is me at the National Council for Self-Insurers. Has nothing to do with nursing professionals. I'm talking to the people who do workers' comp. Those are the people who make decisions on whether or not you'll get payment from the workers' comp insurance that you get if you hurt yourself at work, right? going to different advocacy events. This is here at our capital here in Maryland, getting to know the people who are also advocating in your space. And then also just being able to make an impact in other nurses. So those are just ways that I choose to leverage my voice. Those are ways that I choose to create impact in my sphere of influence. But there are so many different ways to be able to create that for yourself. I didn't mention this here, but I find that a lot of nurses tend to be fearful about going into dispensaries. Again, that fear of losing their license, the stigma, they think it's going to be something kind of crazy in there. Most of the dispensaries are beautiful. They have their packaging, they're beautifully laid out, and it looks nice. So getting to know your local dispensary, going in there, get to know your bud tender, understand what the experience is like. If it's not for your patient, for yourself, so that way you can get access to clean bud and not have to worry about, going to your local, underground guy who might have some shady practices. I don't know. I don't know. So definitely get into the industry the way that it is today, so that way you can help shift the tide of how it will be tomorrow. I'll put it that way. So thank you. These are a bunch of nurses. I just want to give a shout out to them that I've been able to help and support through their journeys. It's been like these past few years have been such a game changer for me. It's been a lot of fun, and I really, really, really appreciate you all having me here, being willing to listen to my story. So thanks again.
Thank you, Ashley, for this amazing presentation. I can just say you are amazing.
Oh, thank you.
I look up to you so much. Actually, I also did my master's degree last year, and I wrote about cannabis. So I see myself like younger you.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. Means so much to me. It really does.
So if somebody has some questions or want to say something, now is your chance, please. Anybody?
I will ask a question. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. How can I make a question? In my life, or at least 12 months ago, I lost a sister-in-law, and I was asking myself what kind of cannabis should I buy, or which one would be better. And I was always asking, what is the guidelines for which kind of is the best for which illness? And I did not find on the world internet. So probably I don't find any information about that. And I was looking and searching for it. Do you have in America some guidelines? Which kind of cannabis is for what? For what sort of help? For, I don't know, for cancer, for different diseases and so on. Yeah. Do you have some guidelines? Yes?
Kind of. So I think the first thing I want to say that everybody responds to the cannabis plant differently. So the approach that I take, and for the most part, most people that I've worked with have also taken, is let's start with a specific cannabinoid profile and terpene combination mix, and then adjust over time. And so we do know that certain terpene profiles are effective with specific types of symptomatology. So for example, linalool is a terpene that is good to help regulate and support a sleep cycle. And so what I would say to a patient is find a product that has linalool in it, and it has the main terpene, right? And then when you talk about the cannabinoid profile, we know it's over 100 cannabinoids in the plant. Some of them we know a lot about, some of them we don't know as much about, but I generally focus on that CBD and THC ratio. And if we're talking about pain, I'll usually start with a 1-to-1, like equal parts of THC, equal parts of CBD, and regulate it that way. So over time, we'll either increase or decrease the THC and CBD based on how you respond. And we document the journey over time. So we document the cannabinoids, we document the terpenes, and we document the responses. And then as you kind of try different things out, then you can fine tune what works best for you in relation to the thing that you're trying to address. And so the thing that makes holistic medicine different is that we're not fixing the disease, we're not curing the disease, we are targeting the symptoms. So if you are suffering from pain in relation to the cancer, we would target that. If you're suffering from pain, sleeplessness, anxiety, and lack of nausea, if we're doing all of that, then we have to prioritize and we have to work on one thing at a time, and then we'll build the regimen that works for you as time goes on. Does that answer you?
Thank you for explaining. It was very nice to hear that, because I am not working in this branch, and when I was starting to read on internet everything what is possible to find, I wanted to find the best, not the best quantity of cannabis, but the best kind of cannabis would be the best for this illness. And this is very hard to find, because we know on internet you see a lot of different kinds of cannabis, and you don't know which one is the best one. So I think in what I heard today, you have a better guidance what we have. I don't know for Slovenia for sure. There are better professional like I am. Especially I know Božo, I have saw him for 1 year ago. And I hope there will be better in Slovenia in the future for us, especially also in Serbia, because I know there is no guidelines, it's very difficult to find any cannabis, any sort of cannabis. Because one moment ago had one woman explained about Serbia, and that is why I know in Serbia it's very difficult to find that. There are a lot of people which are asking which is the best cannabis. Mm-hmm. And so when you are searching on the market, you don't know which is the best one. And Božo always said, also you have to test it. You have to put to test that you know what do you have is the best for this and this illness. So thank you, Božo. Hello? Nobody's saying something.
You're welcome.
In short, that what Ashley is saying. Everybody is individual. We are all different. We have all our own endocannabinoid system, our own receptors, our own endocannabinoids, and everybody is different. Everybody needs different kind of cannabinoids. So I think the best way is, like you said, actually experimenting what is best for you. Mm-hmm. So try different products.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to ask you, Ashley, what is the general feedback from the patients?
Okay, so if they have no guidance and they're like this, some of them will be like, oh, this didn't work at all. But it's because of the instant gratification isn't really there for them. So really they just need encouragement to keep going, to keep trying, a little direction. How do you choose what might work better for you? Smokables may not be a good form for you. Edibles may not be a good form for you. Suppository may be a great form for you. Who knows, right? So letting them know all of the options and the considerations to make as they're making decisions is really helpful. For those people who do go through the process and are patient with it, they get amazing results. They get amazing results. Like, it literally changes their life, even if it's a matter of, they could be terminal and just enjoying the last year, weeks or months of their life. So I think it varies from patient to patient, and it also depends on managing expectations. So, people hear pain, oh, it's going to solve my pain. If you take it and it didn't necessarily get rid of the pain like an opioid will, they'll say, oh, it just didn't work. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about, did it decrease? Let's talk about the intensity of the pain. Let's talk about the frequency of the pain. So even just having the awareness, like, you'll be surprised how many people you say, where's your pain? I don't know, somewhere around here somewhere. And it's like, so let's take some time to even recognize where the pain lives within you, right? And so a lot of people just don't have that type of awareness to even recognize if something's working for them. And so a lot of times, like, that's the conversation, that's the support, that's the education that needs to happen.
Do you have some specific cannabis just for breast cancer?
No, it doesn't work that way. Mm-mm.
Okay, no, I was just asking.
No, but I would look into a cannabis cannabis that has CBG in it, because it's good for decreasing inflammation. Also, something that has like pinene in it, something that has not pinene. I mean, yes, pinene, but it's another. Oh, myrcene is also an anti-inflammatory. So if you look at your profile and it has those things in it, that would be a really, really good place to start. And then just kind of including equal parts CBD and THC in very, very small doses. And because you're not looking for a specific physical body result, you just want to slow down the proliferation of the cancer. So I'm gonna say this too in relation to cancer. A lot of people think it cures it. There is no scientific research that says that it does, but there are anecdotal situations where that has occurred. So as a nursing professional, I can't say that it'll get rid of it, but I do want you to be aware that there are patients that have said, today it was it was this big, the cancer was this big, and then tomorrow it was smaller. I've heard it being said, but the evidence, I've never seen evidence that says the same thing.
Okay.
Somebody else has a question? Oh, yes.
One last from me. So we mentioned endocannabinoid system, and that everybody has differently. So if we have some kind of disbalance, that means that levels of different cannabinoids in our system is different. And I found somewhere that sometimes some of them can be higher than they should be. And in terms of, let me explain the case. It's about epilepsy, because I have epilepsy for almost 10 years, and I found somewhere that taking cannabis, it's a really, really, really good stuff. But also taking in consideration that some of the cannabinoids are higher for people having epilepsy. So they need somehow not to avoid those. Now I know for CBD, CB, and CBG that you mentioned. So the question really is, did you ever in your practice met somebody who has epilepsy and needed to, I mean, I know that you need to check which one is working for you, but is there some kind of possibility that, or known stuff that we should not go, for example, for CBD? Just some example.
Are you saying, is there something you should avoid when you have epilepsy?
like one of the types of cannabinoids. If some of the cannabinoids in our endocannabinoid, oh my God, how long is that word? In our system is higher than they should be. That means that we need to avoid cannabinoids that are same.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Right. Am I saying it right?
I think I understand. So our endocannabinoid system. Okay, so we have naturally producing cannabinoids, right? And so when we're talking about, and the purpose of those cannabinoids are to bind to the endocannabinoid system. And so that's if you have the right amount of cannabinoids and your receptor system is working properly, they bind together along with the other enzymes and all those kind of things. If they bind together, then ideally you'd be in a state of homeostasis or balance. And so we can almost assume when have disease that you are off balance in some way. And so introducing external cannabinoids through the plant is how we're kind of supplementing, right? So when you're having seizure disorder, it might not necessarily mean that you are deficient in cannabinoids, but you might need additional cannabinoids within the body because there are receptors throughout the body. Some of them are in the brain that need to be introduced to the body to kind of slow down the energetic dysfunction. And so a lot of times seizure patients ends up taking high dose THC in order to manage seizure symptoms, right? And so that's why they take things like Rick Simpson, because it's very highly concentrated within the body and it just works. And so there's so what I just described, the process for most patients, the chronic patient, is actually quite different for a seizure patient because they actually want to build up tolerance so they can tolerate more THC within the body over time. So it's a slightly different process for our seizure patients and especially our pediatric seizure patients, because they can actually tolerate way more cannabinoids than most adults can in the body. With all of that being said, do you want to avoid a specific cannabinoid? Not necessarily, but it might be a few terpenes that you might want to avoid because they kind of excite in the body. So an example of that might be limonene, the citrusy kind of terpenes, because they actually kind of give more of an excited effect in the body and it can actually trigger. So even in the story where I was talking about the young woman with her daughter with seizure disorder, MDMA is actually a compound that excites the brain, which is why it triggered the seizure within the little girl's body, if that makes sense. And so, again, every patient is different. I don't think that you necessarily need to avoid a specific cannabinoid composition, but it is a different process on how you treat seizure patients too. I don't work with seizure patients personally, and I definitely am not working with children, to be honest with you. But I do know that that's generally the process that's taken with that population.
Yeah, that's valuable information. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
I may have one question again, if somebody have or not. I was asking myself. I was searching also for psoriasis. I was searching the cream because I have twins and they have both severe psoriasis. And in the time I noticed that the cream is made of cannabis is not working probably like I would expect to work. And how is it about that in America? Do you have some psoriasis cream with cannabis or not?
Yeah, we do. We have, well, it's just generally seen as a topical. I'm not a huge fan of the topicals I've been around because I feel like it's really oil-based. It's hard to absorb it in the skin. So I find that making your own actually is a better option and it works better. So maybe trying to make your own oil made from coconut oil. And so you won't have all of the other additives to it that kind of blocks the absorption, especially if you have like petroleum in it, because your body won't absorb it.
Yeah, it's true. I also search for, on the internet some kind of a recipe for making a cream.
Yeah, I suggest.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, I was saying I suggest making your own.
Okay, thank you.
I agree. I want to ask you just one question from our member. One of our member wrote me that she cannot ask, she's not here with us, but she wanted to ask something. If you have like experience with women with endometriosis, do you know somebody that is treating with cannabinoids or something?
Yeah, suppository, best way to go. And
or there is results.
Yeah, it gives you the most direct results. So a couple things. So suppository definitely works. Absorption is, and it's impactful, and it's targeted in that specific area and region. The other thing that you can do is, and everybody chuckles when I say this, but they have like CBD bath bombs and things of that nature. So that also helps with the pain. If you take a bath, do the bath bomb, and then also the masturbation also helps because it tightens the muscle and then it helps release, if that makes sense. So even if you did it in the bathtub with the bath bomb, definitely really good results.
Maybe somebody else. If there's no question, we can end this.
All right.
Thank you again, Ashley, for this. It was very great. We learned a lot. We will stay in contact, of course. So everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for participating. And I wish everybody a great night. And that's all from me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Talk to you all soon.